Thank you for joining us for the Conformed to Christ podcast, where we aim to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. My name is George Mays, and here with me is my friend Jay Jones.
What's up, man?
Rockstar Jay Jones.
Yeah.
How you doing over there?
It was a rough night.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was a rough night. Yeah, you know, it all started at Scooters, and
just went downhill from there, huh?
next thing I know, you know, I've got flashes of a bowling alley parking lot. I wake up on the back of a horse out in their wildlife refuge.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you. No, it was actually worse than that, George.
That's quite the story.
It was a worse night than that. There was a toddler involved.
Mm.
Yeah. It's, George, the age, man. I'm almost 40.
Yeah.
The toddlers are for the young. It's a young man and a young woman's game.
Let's see, how old is your daughter now?
She's about 2.5.
About 2.5.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what was going on with her last night. She had like something going on. I don't know, man. And so she's.
So you've got a 2.5-year-old. I've got let's see, almost a 2-year-old.
Yeah. We're
almost 40. We're what, a week apart.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge difference. So you've got a 16-year-old. I've got a 14-year-old. There's a huge difference from when they were born and when our youngest.
Oh yeah.
We're getting too old for this.
No sleep last night, man, and it really is majorly affecting. Like back in the 20s, like when Dre was little, I could not sleep.
Mm-hmm.
I could go 2 days without sleeping,
yeah,
and it wouldn't affect me. I woke up today like splitting headache, eyeball hurting, can't think straight. First thing Evangeline says, she wakes up, smile on her face.
Yeah.
Dad, sleep good? No.
Yeah.
No. Nope. So.
Yeah, when I was in seminary, I worked overnights and went to school during the day, get maybe 3, maybe 4 hours of sleep, maybe
every day
before I'd go back to work. I don't think I could do that anymore.
Nah.
I don't think so. So I want everyone to look at Jay. Just put the camera on Jay. You've got a real in-game feel going over here.
What are you talking about?
You got a real Fat Thor thing going on here, Jay. You got.
I can see it. I can see that.
I can't see your eyes.
Yeah.
Like you could just sit there and.
I just sit here like in the corner.
You could do a Weekend at Bernie's thing.
You're talking about like when they're given the briefing, and he's just over here like this.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those episodes.
Yeah, I'm going to lean heavily on this first segment on you.
Yeah,
on lawlessness.
Okay,
I think we got good material.
Yeah,
we got this first segment on lawlessness, and then Christmas is coming up. We're going to talk about. The incarnation and heresies around the incarnation, and how you may even encounter some today.
Right.
So we'll release that. We'll release the whole thing in full tomorrow, but we'll release this segment on video on the incarnation next week before Christmas.
Okay.
So we've got this lawlessness.
You got it all lined up.
And you've done some groundwork on this lawlessness.
Yeah.
And you found all kinds of crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's some bizarre things going on in our country nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
I was reminded as I was looking at this topic, I was reminded of Matthew 24, verse 12, where Jesus, he's talking to his disciples on the Mount of Olives, talking about really, I think, the period from the first coming to the second coming. And he says in verse 12, he says, because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing in our country. We're seeing an increase in lawlessness, but I think we're also seeing a lack of love.
Yeah.
Even as you've got all of this critical race theory and intersectionality. It's all supposed to be about rectifying the oppression
You're right.
that's the systemic racism and systemic oppression that's just inherent in our country. And even as all of this rhetoric is going out there, the love is not there.
Right. Yeah.
Like
yeah.
there's no love for these men and women who think that they are the opposite sex, or they're nothing at all, or it's just all fluid, and they're one of the 300 genders out there.
Right.
There's no love in just letting them live this delusional lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like there's no love there.
A lot of it in America, at least, is calculated. It's power based. It's not love based. It's power based.
Yeah.
And it's financial. It's you're able to sell. Like it's what's popular.
Mm-hmm.
It's what sells.
Yeah.
Right. If it didn't sell in America, they wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right. Let's not pretend. Right. That is the driver, the engine that drives this country.
Yeah.
Is capitalism. And so what they've done is made a calculated decision to go this way. So let's not pretend it's based in love.
Yeah.
Right. People like to pretend that, but it's not. And the reason it's not is because you have companies like Nike and the NBA and others who will be all over the social justice stuff. Like, hey, Georgia, you want to pass that abortion law? We won't do business with you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, they're in China.
Right.
They've made a calculated decision that Americans are too stupid to connect the dots.
Yeah.
And so in China, they can make tons of money by being in bed with the regime.
Right.
But over here, they need to pretend like they love and care everybody.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
Care Bear.
We should play that video.
Yeah, that's a funny video.
All right, so I've got 4 things here and if I would have gone down the rabbit hole, I'm sure I could have found even more. But we'll just go in the order that I've got them listed here, and we can talk about them, because I think each of them is an instance of lawlessness, and this lawlessness results in, it is rooted in a lack of love for our neighbors. So the first instance is what's going on in Minneapolis.
Okay.
Now, this has been going on, most of the year.
Yeah.
Ever since the George Floyd death, there have been calls for defunding or even abolishing the police.
Yes.
Well, last week, the Minneapolis City Council, they voted to defund the police $7.7 million.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah. I was looking into this a little bit, and I actually talked to one of our...
Which though, they walked back a lot, because initially it was like, abolish the police, defund the police totally.
yeah, they wanted to get rid of it altogether.
And they're like, hang on, maybe that's dangerous for us politically.
Yeah, so coming into this vote, they initially wanted to drop the number of officers from 888 to 750.
Yeah.
Now, Minneapolis has a population. This was from 2018, but it's probably hanging right around there anyway.
Yeah.
The population in Minneapolis is 425,403 people.
Yeah.
And they have 888 police officers right now. If I did my math right, which is always questionable, that's one officer for every 480 people.
Yeah.
That's a big job.
It's a big job.
That's a huge job.
Yeah.
This is a big city.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they wanted to drop the number of officers from 888 to 750, but the mayor called it, quote, irresponsible.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Because there've been some things
maybe
going on.
Maybe a little bit, right?
Yeah. There've been
even after he called it irresponsible, they voted 7-6 to maintain the cap at 888.
Well, there have been some really bad things going on in this city through this year that, I think snapped them back into reality.
Well, let me just list a few things here. So there have been 532 gunshot victims. which is double from last year.
Yeah.
5,100 violent crimes, up from 4,000 last year.
Uh-huh.
And this is the big one. There have been 375 carjackings. That is a 331% uptick from last year.
Yeah.
331% higher in
Mm.
carjackings
Yeah.
in Minneapolis than last year. I wonder why.
Right.
I wonder why. And I know that they've even reported that the police aren't responding to all the calls.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming it's because people are
Yeah.
wanting to defund the police and get
Right.
rid of them, and
Yeah.
so they're
They're
showing
may
them. They're
and there
showing
may
them
just
what.
be too many for them to respond to.
Yeah, yeah.
With the
I
amount.
talked to I talked to one of our members who is a police officer,
Uh-huh.
and he was telling me that there's only 164 officers here in Lawton.
Yeah.
Now, we're much smaller than Minneapolis.
What do we have?
We have
100?
92,543 is what I found.
You got to include Fort Sill though, right?
Right. I don't think that's counting Fort Sill.
Yeah.
I think it's just counting
Yeah.
the
city.
city. Yeah. 164 officers. But what he said is that they're supposed to have 199.
Uh-huh.
He said that he doesn't think that there's been an increase since the 90s and maybe the 80s.
Mm. Wow.
That's wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine when you're calling for defunding the police or abolishing the police, when you're cutting, almost $8 million from their budget, like you are hindering them doing their job.
Uh-huh.
But think of the lack of love for your neighbor that has to go into this mindset that we can just get rid of the police and everything's going to be fine. It's that this idea that it's worse with the police.
Well, it's based in a as most liberalism is, whether it would be theological liberalism or political liberalism, it's based in a faulty anthropology. And what I mean by that, if you never heard that term, it's based in a faulty understanding of the nature of man, right? So most people holding to liberalism would believe that man is by nature good. Yep. And so what happens when you're over-policed, as they would say, is you put pressures on these communities that would not otherwise be there. And many of these things are actually a reaction to law enforcement, that people are basically good. And if we left people alone, they would work things out on their own because people are basically good.
Yeah.
And it's not a biblical understanding of man.
We saw this with Chaz, right?
Yes.
Up in Portland.
Uh-huh.
The first thing that they did when they took over this area is they built walls to keep people out.
Yeah.
And they set aside some people to enforce the rules.
Right.
Because they know intrinsically that if left to themselves, it's a free-for-all.
Yeah. And so, the biblical anthropology is that people are born in sin, and by nature are not good. Like, everyone's capable of good things, and many people do go through their life and they do good things for their neighbors. But the nature of man is such that when layers of authorities, and there's different layers of authorities that God's put in place to protect society from man's sinful nature. Mm. Right? You just start with the bottom would be your conscience.
Yeah.
God's given everyone a conscience. Well, you can go against your conscience so much that as you get older, it becomes seared, and you're capable of more and more evil.
And the problem with the conscience is that it's fallen also.
Yeah.
Like, God has given us this restraining influence in us, but because of the overarching effects of the fall.
Yeah.
It's I guess the theological term would be the noetic effects of the fall. The
Yeah.
fall affects not just our bodies, but it affects our minds, it affects our emotions, it affects our conscience.
Yeah.
Our conscience is fallen, and so it doesn't always work the way it's supposed to.
Yes. And so, behind all of these authorities, we have God's word that's to guide it.
Mm-hmm.
But you go up one step from there, you have parental authority.
Right.
And so, what do you see in liberalism is a destruction of God's design for a family. Well, when you destroy God's design for a family, you get more lawlessness,
Yeah.
right? I always know whenever I meet certain kids from that are my kids' age, I can tell pretty quick who has like both set of parents at home. And this isn't a 100% thing. It's not to say that a single parent can't raise good kids. It's just to say, in a broad sense, the kids that have both parents at home, um, they are a little bit more respectful, I would say. Just in their dialogue with you, you can kind of tell. And I think it bears out too. I think statistics would show, if you look at statistics, males commit crime at a higher rate than females. Well, most of them are fatherless. They have no fathers. So these stats, I mean, you can't argue with them. Men are dangerous to the world that weren't raised by other men in the context of a family. And that's just God's design, and it's meant to restrain evil. And then you move on from there. I think the church is a form of it, right? So how would the church then help restrain evil in the world?
I mean, you've got the established order of leadership. You have the pastors and elders who are teaching the church sound doctrine. They're teaching them what the scriptures say, admonishing them to obey, to live this out. But then in the congregational structure, you've got each other holding each other accountable.
Yeah.
And then you have church discipline, which is meant to call people back to faithfulness.
Yeah.
So you don't just let people run wild.
Yeah.
If they're running wild, you have this body of believers who are calling them back to repentance. So it's restraining that evil. And also, as the gospel goes forth and people are hearing the gospel and they are believing the gospel, then you have a bunch of Christians.
Yeah.
And as there's more and more Christians, you're going to have less and less lawlessness.
More and more Christians who, out of love, out of their, they don't obey the law in order to get God's love, but God's love has transformed their heart. Now, what do? They
Right.
start to obey God.
Yeah.
And they're living according to God's laws.
Yeah.
Which are a good thing for society.
Yeah. And I think even if people aren't regenerate as they're hearing the law of God, even if they're doing it out of a sense of guilt or obligation or even out of tradition,
right?
It's still restraining evil.
Yes, it does restrain evil. The more we'll say biblical Christians, because there's a ton of people that call themselves Christians.
Right.
They're all over here, but we know they're not. And how do we know they're not? Is because they don't obey God. Like Jesus says, if you love me, you'll obey my commands.
Yeah.
And they don't. So hey, Jesus says you'll know them by their fruit. This isn't being judgmental. This is doing what Jesus says. Their fruit, you go up to them and you're like, hey, you're a Christian. Let's see your Christian oranges. And you're like, I've never sprouted an orange. I sprout apples.
Yeah.
Maybe not a Christian.
Yeah.
Right. So if the more biblical Christians are converted through the ministry of the church, as the gospel goes forth, society, the last level that God has to restrain is the government. So the more Christians you have following the Bible, the more the government would reflect God's law.
Yeah.
Right. And
so government itself it restrains evil.
Yeah, that's its purpose, right?
Even though the most totalitarian governments restrain evil. Even in North Korea, you can't just go around
murdering people.
The government is going to punish evildoers.
They may themselves be corrupt and murderers.
Yeah, right.
Right.
But outside of the government,
yeah,
you can't just do whatever.
Right.
But the closer that a government aligns itself to God's word, the more it restrains evil.
Yeah.
And so that's why we would say that America is still the greatest nation.
Yeah.
Because its government, as it was originally intended, is the closest to biblical Christianity.
And this is part of our tradition. I believe Moses and the Ten Commandments are back at the back of the Hall of Congress. So, like, where the president gives his speech, I think at the very back there is Moses with the 2 tablets.
Oh, really?
Like, they're in there making
Okay.
law, right?
Yeah.
They're making law.
Right.
Behind them,
Mm.
up on the top, is Moses with the tablets. I wonder what that could mean.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
We're a Puritan nation.
Mm-hmm.
We're founded by not everybody were Christians, but the founding of this nation was so heavily influenced by Puritanism.
Right.
So do you have a couple examples, I think, of the government being lawless, and it's a direct connection to them throwing off God's law, His literal law, and I think you have 2 examples of that.
Well, I think I've got 3.
Okay.
So, we were talking about Chaz heading up into the Pacific Northwest. We've got Seattle.
Yeah.
Their city council is considering a law that would dismiss a lot of misdemeanor crimes,
Yeah.
including stealing.
Yeah.
And I found this. I don't even know what site I found. I think it's a Seattle news site. But it says that the Seattle City Council is considering new legislation that would create a legal loophole that would make substance addiction, mental illness, or poverty a valid legal defense for nearly all misdemeanor crimes committed in the city. So what that means is you could walk into a grocery store and steal some food if your defense is my family is starving.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Or I think this would,
what's
what would be evidence of a substance abuse if you go in and steal some medicine from a pharmacy, right?
Yeah.
You can break into a pharmacy and steal
food. Yeah,
steal medicine.
Still medicine, still food. What's really weird is like a lot of these cities like this, these liberal cities, they have these other laws that prevent churches from feeding people.
Yeah.
I kid you not. Like they won't let churches house and feed homeless people.
Yeah.
But they will allow people to steal food.
Right.
It's insane, man.
Yeah.
Insane. But it's not only just food, if I remember correctly. Like they're allowing for misdemeanor shoplifting.
Mm-hmm.
They're not in any way gonna enforce it. So
So
somebody can roll up into your store if they're not hungry. They'd be like, hey, a couple of Red Bulls, sure, I'll take a few, and then just take them off.
Got a history of mental illness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Right.
And there's no way the storekeeper can stop them.
Yeah.
They can't do anything.
Right.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy.
Yeah.
God's law says don't steal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thou shalt not steal. It doesn't have there's not an exemption clause in there.
And that's not heartlessness towards people that legitimately don't have food and need food. We should be helping these people. We should be showing love to these people. But that doesn't dismiss God's word that says don't steal.
Right. Well, again, if you didn't have laws that would punish churches
Right.
for trying to take care of homeless people,
Mm-hmm.
maybe the church, or if you didn't, if we were taxed less, right? You don't churches aren't taxed, but the people in
The
those
people
churches
are, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if you would tax the people of the churches less, I can promise you what would happen is there would be more homeless ministries,
Yeah.
like there were before in this country. So yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's I don't. Again, it's based in this weird fantasy anthropology
Mm-hmm.
that thinks people are basically good,
Right. Yeah.
that they won't totally abuse this law
Right.
and just totally ransack and make it impossible to have a small business in this town.
Yeah, they're seeing mass exodus from California because of all the liberal laws. You've got Tesla moving down to Texas, which I find funny because they're moving out of the liberal area of California and they're moving to the liberal area of Texas.
Well, I think
down in Austin.
Elon's a little quirky. He's kind of conservative some ways and libertarian.
Yeah.
Libertarian in others, and some he's socially
Yeah.
liberal.
Right.
He's a weird guy.
He is
man.
a weird guy.
But
yeah.
most geniuses are weird.
Yeah. So not only Seattle, but there's been some shenanigans going on in Texas.
Yeah.
A representative in Texas, you want to guess what party?
I don't need to guess. The listener knows. The listener already knows.
Yeah. Democrat state representative in Texas is calling on. Let me see if I can find it. I don't know what happened to it, Jay. This is what happens when I don't bring my computer in. She is calling for an amendment on the stand your ground law in Texas. What that means is right now on the books, you can defend yourself even lethally against someone who's breaking into your house.
Yeah.
Well, this wise representative, name is Terry Meza, I believe.
Yeah.
She introduced House Bill 196, and what this does, it's they have something called the castle doctrine.
Yeah.
You can defend your home from an intruder. What she said is that this bill does not repeal the castle doctrine, and it doesn't restrict homeowners from using firearms in self-defense. But what she said is that it requires, notice that word, requires, a homeowner to exhaust the potential of safely retreating into the habitation before using deadly force in defense of themselves or their property.
Yeah.
So what that means is if someone's breaking into your house, you have to do all you can to run away.
Right.
In your own home.
Yeah.
You have to run as far away so that someone can come in and rob you.
Yeah.
And only in that last line of defense can you defend yourself.
And this is dangerous because you don't know intention often, right?
Right.
So
I would warn people because there is a parody of this going around, and I found it where it's putting words into her mouth
that aren't true,
and they're exaggerations.
Yeah.
Like she's saying that most people are not robbing to harm. They're robbing because they need the stuff, and and you don't have to worry about it because your insurance is going to cover it and all this.
Right.
So be careful. This is another instance of really research your stuff before you post, because I found the parody from a popular evangelical leader, and
it wasn't true.
Yeah. I don't know if this person took it down or apologized, but the real story, it's still just as ludicrous.
Yeah. So in this case, the Bible does speak to this issue. The castle doctrine, which I haven't read entirely, itself could be lawlessness. But her proposal is also lawlessness. Yeah. So the standard is not someone comes into your house and you just whip out your gun and blast his head off.
Right.
That's maybe the American way.
Right.
But that's not God's way. So God talks about this in Exodus 22:2. Right? He says, if a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. He shall surely repay. So, here's the issue. Someone breaks into your house at night. It's dark. You don't know their intention.
Right.
You take lethal action.
Yeah.
You're not guilty. You're not blood guilty, which means if you're blood guilty, it means you face capital punishment, which we'll get to in a minute. You forfeit your life.
Yeah.
You took a man's life. And so God's standard is you don't know the man's intention. Is he there to rape the women of your house? Is he there to kidnap? Is he there to kill you? You don't know. So you pop up in the middle of the night, you take lethal action. You're innocent. He doesn't say you must retreat. You must try to gather your family
right.
and exhaust all options and retreat.
Yeah.
But it's different during the daytime, because in the daytime, you can see what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. You can see, is the man there to attack? Is he there to cause physical harm? Is he there to grab your newly found coveted PS5 and he's bounding out of the door, he's fleeing,
right.
And then you whip out your AR and you just mow this dude down in the middle of the daytime, knowing he's no threat to you physically.
Yeah.
The Bible says that would be a sin.
Mm-hmm.
This guy, you see him, he steals, he's gone. You don't just you don't blast him.
Yeah.
So God has a standard,
Mm.
and the standard is based in that the image of God, that all people are made in God's image, and that image is so valuable that if you can clearly see in the daytime, this person's not there to kill you, he's not there to physically harm people, you don't get to kill him. Now, it doesn't mean you can't catch him
Yeah.
and make him repay.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you can't pull out a gun
Right.
and say you're not going anywhere.
Get on the ground. Right.
Yeah.
You just can't take
Can't just
lethal,
blast them.
Yeah, can't take lethal action.
Right.
So this is one of those again, the Bible's filled with a lot of these because God's ways are way better than our ways.
Right.
His laws are better than ours. And so this is a perfect example of where God's law is directly applicable.
Yeah.
This really transcends all times and cultures.
Right.
So, but we're lawless. We're a lawless society.
Yeah, and we're trying to find standards that people are rejecting. Like these laws, they're just arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
They're arbitrary based on the fads of the day or people's feelings. They're not based on anything that is absolute.
Yeah.
So as soon as you start to drift away from God's law, like you're basing how you defend your home based on God's law,
Yeah.
not just based on what is most expedient.
Yeah.
It'd be super easy to just shoot the guy and call the police and say someone broke into my home, I killed him.
Right. Yeah. I mean, God knows.
Yeah.
If you're a Christian, you shouldn't be, like maybe you're a Christian veteran like me, like you shouldn't be waiting for the day that somebody tries to break into your
Right.
house so you can blast them.
Yeah.
That would show that you've got a heart issue.
Mm-hmm.
You got a heart problem. Like, this is the time where I take action.
Right.
It should be a last resort to take someone's life.
Yeah. But again, this law from this Texas representative, it's not based on anything.
Yeah, it's just based off of her feelings.
Yeah. No, there's a grain of truth in it, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
But she doesn't know where that grain of truth comes from.
Yeah.
She doesn't know that there already is a standard that she could appeal to.
Yeah.
To back this law.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to go back to God's law. We need to go back to reading it and understanding it and seeing how does this apply to our own lives? How can this back our own laws and cause them to be good?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Final issue.
Yeah.
Is the death penalty.
Okay.
Came across this on CNN. Dozens of members of Congress call on Biden to end the federal death penalty. So there are some senators who have called upon Biden to end the death penalty as soon as he takes office.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is spurred from some executions that have taken place this year. I think that there's been 10, I believe, since July.
Okay.
I could be wrong on that, but this would be the federal death penalty, and they're scheduled to execute another criminal on January 20th.
Okay.
So I think this is where this is coming from. They wrote, quote, "With a stroke of your pen, you can stop all federal executions, prohibit United States attorneys from seeking the death penalty, dismantle death row at FCC Terre Haute, and call for the resentencing of people who are currently sentenced to death. Each of these elements are critical to help prevent greater harm and further loss of life." So let's talk about the death penalty some.
All right.
Jay.
Yeah.
I know you sent me a tweet from Peter Buttigieg. Did I say his name right?
Buttigieg.
Buttigieg. All right. He's been appointed as transportation secretary, isn't he?
Yeah.
I think that's what Biden is. I don't.
Yeah.
Anyway,
You got to point all the people
that's right.
that you defeated
All right.
to other posts.
Hold on to that because I'll say something about that in just a second.
All right.
Yeah. So he tweeted, "The death penalty is wrong always."
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the death penalty, because you and I are abolitionists. We believe that abortion should be abolished.
Yeah.
Because we believe it's the taking of a human life. And there are critics who would say, "Well, you're against this, but you're for the death penalty."
Yeah.
And we're both for the death penalty.
The criticism.
So what?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
And I've engaged with those of the left. They would usually say something like, "You're against abortion, but you're pro death penalty. You don't really value life. You're not pro life."
Right.
So
Pro life it's morphed into pro everything.
right. Mm-hmm. So, and the reason is, again, because I believe they have a faulty anthropology. They don't have a correct understanding of man.
Yeah.
I would turn that around and say, no, I value life so much so that the only valid punishment for taking a human life is to forfeit your own life.
Yeah.
That's it. And I don't come up with that arbitrarily, right?
Right.
That comes from the Bible, from Genesis chapter 9.
Yeah.
Moses gets off the ark. It's kind of like civilization is starting over, and God's giving instructions, and one of them is in regards to the taking of a human life.
Yeah.
It's do you have it there?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, you want to read that for us?
Yeah. This is God is blessing Noah and his sons and saying, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." This is Genesis 2 all over again. The waters have parted, dry ground has appeared. Here's Noah and his 3 sons and their wives, Noah's wife. They're coming off the ark with all of these animals. It's Adam and Eve again.
Right.
It's quote unquote new earth.
Right.
And so he's blessing them. But then he says, verse 5, "For your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man, from his fellow man," and that word literally means brother, "from his brother, I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image."
Yes.
I think that word brother is important because I think it's echoing Genesis 4, where the first sin outside the garden is the murder of a brother.
Right.
Cain murders his brother Abel. And so I think that the reason why God is giving this command is that it's echoing what happened after the fall.
Right.
So he tells them there will be a reckoning from your brother if you kill your brother.
Yes.
Right. And so whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. That's the death penalty.
Right. And this isn't referring to like warfare. We can see that application as we move through the Bible. This is referring to murder.
Yeah.
So, and the reason is it's based in the image of God.
Yeah.
We don't value who we are as human beings like God does.
Yeah.
God places such a high value on us. And the reason is because we're the only creature in all of creation. This is what's mind-blowing, right? The angels are incredible. Above them, seraphim and the cherubim, incredible beings, powerful beings. But they're not called the image of God, right? We're called the image of God.
Right.
And it's because there's such a high value placed on that. And so that for us would feed into why we believe abortion is a criminal act.
Right. We would call for the death penalty for those who
Absolutely.
are procuring or performing abortions.
Yes. And if that were the standard, there would be a lot less abortions.
Yeah.
A lot.
Right.
A lot less. And so we apply consistently, right? So the man who breaks into a house and kills a family, he ought to be put to death.
Right.
And it ought not to take 20 years.
Yeah.
It ought to be done swiftly.
Well,
I would argue, and I would say I think it should be publicly.
Yeah, they're arguing that there's studies have been done that capital punishment doesn't deter crime, and I think the reason for that is like you said, it takes forever,
It's not public.
and it's not public.
Yeah, no one sees
Like
it.
that, you can be on death row for years
Yeah,
before you actually are put to death,
yeah.
and it's private. I mean, if you're not following the news, I didn't know that so many people had been executed by the federal government.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's all private.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm with you. This also shows dignity towards the person who is guilty.
Uh-huh.
Like they shouldn't be locked in a box
Right.
for 10, 15 years.
Yeah, our modern prison system is not based in the Bible either.
Yeah.
I would say it's inhumane.
Mm-hmm.
You don't lock humans. What is it going to do? It's going to do all kinds of crazy things to them mentally.
You're locking them up like animals, and so
And you're surprised that they become like an animal.
like animals. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the institutionalism. I mean, that's proven. They come out harder, worse than they went in. I mean,
Yeah.
rarely, I think, do they come out reformed.
Right.
The prison system doesn't reform people.
And again, it's not based on God's word.
Yeah.
You can scour the law of God from Exodus through Deuteronomy. You will not find a prison system.
Right.
You won't find God telling them to build jails.
Right.
There, the punishment for crimes is laid out
Yes.
very clearly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and if we went back to that, God's law is better than our law.
Yeah. It's based in repaying.
Mm-hmm.
Like you make, there's a redeeming aspect to it.
Yeah.
You make right the crime you committed.
Right.
If the crime is so grotesque, there are many in God's law, then because he values humanity, he values the image of God, then the requirement there is the death penalty.
Yeah.
Yeah. But people don't like God. Let's just make it straight up. Like people, you're listening, you're uncomfortable. You're like, and the reason is you don't like God and you don't like his law and you think we know better than God.
Mm-hmm.
We can just cut straight through it.
Right.
And you can just say openly and you admit that you hate this God of the Bible. You think he's ridiculous and you think we're ridiculous for believing it. Right. And so I'd point to any culture in all of humanity and say, find one place that has a better setup than what God has given us here, right? You can't find a country because it's all based in arbitrary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, somebody stole, let's cut his hand off.
Right.
So he can suffer the rest of his life
Mm-hmm.
and not be able to perform basic functions like the dignity of work.
Right.
That's just man's wicked inventions.
We're going to be prone to one of two things. We're either going to lessen the consequences, like Seattle, lessening what should be done for a thief, or we're going to be too violent in our reaction. So
yes, you want to talk Lex Talionis law? Is that where you're going to go?
Yeah, I mean that's an eye for an eye.
It's meant to restrain.
It's meant to restrain the judicial system.
Yeah.
And it's the punishment fits the crime.
Right. So you kill my wife, right? What do I do if I'm man unleashed? Well, now I kill your whole family.
Right.
And what do you do in response?
Yeah.
Someone in your family, like one of your kids, they have to wait till they grow up.
Right.
They grow up and they just have vengeance on their mind. They rally.
It's the Hatfields and McCoys, right?
And it's murder, and
Right.
it's just back and forth, and it always ups the game.
It's the mafia.
Yes.
And what we're saying here is
God restrains that.
Right. And Jesus says you've heard it said an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth, but I say.
Yeah.
And then he lays out his law. What he's doing, he's not getting rid of the lex talionis, but he's fixing the wrong interpretation that was given, because the eye for an eye, it was being taken to mean that I can personally take revenge on someone.
Yes.
Like you said, if someone kills your family, you go kill their family.
Yeah.
That's a misinterpretation of the lex talionis. That's taking it for personal vengeance.
Yeah.
The lex talionis, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that is the government. That's the judicial system. The judicial system has the authority to perform capital punishment. You don't.
Yeah.
You can't go kill someone because they're a murderer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The government has been given the God-ordained authority to do these things.
All right. Well, you know what? I think we're going to shut it down. Larry, get ready to fade it out. We had planned we were going to record some other stuff today. We ran out of time. So we're going to have to shut this one down, and then we're going to have to hit record again. And we're going to get into the stuff we're going to release next week on the Incarnation. So hopefully this is beneficial to you. If it has been, please like, subscribe, share. You can do that a couple places. Facebook, you can now go to YouTube, like and subscribe there. And all of your listening platforms for audio podcasting, you can go there. Hopefully it's a benefit to you. Hopefully it's helped you to think through some of the things that are going on in our world with the ultimate goal of helping you to become more and more conformed to Christ.